Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Welcome back to Extrology, a life of purpose and inspiration, where we dive into the journeys and mindsets of extraordinary individuals who have embraced challenges, redefined success, and created powerful impacts. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce a guest whose story will resonate with anyone seeking to live life with intention and courage. My guest, Dave Callan, recently stepped away from an accomplished corporate career, spanning roles with global giants like Manchester United, Team Sky, and travel counsellors. But he didn't just leave a job behind. He left to pursue a new calling with On2 coaching. As someone who's achieved excellence in the boardroom, on the Ironman course, and in ultramarathons, Dave embodies resilience, commitment, and a powerful sense of personal mission. In our conversation, Dave shares what inspired him to make this leap, the lessons he's learned from his recent ultra run in Namibia, and how he approaches life as a series of choices. We dive deep into topics like mental fitness, why it's as essential as physical fitness, and how we can all build resilience and overcome self-limiting beliefs. Dave's journey also includes his decision to live an alcohol-free life, and he opens up about how that transformation has influenced his mindset and purpose. If you're ready to explore what it means to truly live with purpose and step into your potential, this episode is for you. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Dave Callan, good afternoon. Welcome to Extrology. Great to have you here as my guest today.
Thank you for having me, Lee. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Good to see, and welcome back. I'm going to start with that comment, given that you've just come back from an ultra marathon in Namibia. And I want to start by asking you to tell us about that experience, but I think equally as importantly, what motivated you to take on such a physically and mentally demanding challenge?
Well, thank you for the welcome home, Lee. It's been almost a week now, actually, since I returned from Namibia. So lots of reflections, lots of personal reflections for me this week. And, you know, I learned a hell of a lot. So I was out there for 5 days covering, well, the race was 5 days. I was out there for a little longer. I was covering 250 kilometers in the harshest conditions that you can imagine across 5 days. So it was a multi-stage ultramarathon, and it was by far the most demanding event that I've ever done, both physically and emotionally. And that's exactly what motivated me to do it. You know, it might sound a little bit sadistic, but I knew it was going to involve a lot of suffering. I knew it was going to involve a lot of emotional and physical pain, but I knew that coming out the other side of it, I will have learned something, and I learned a hell of a lot as well. So I was there for the growth, really. I was there to challenge myself. I was there to elevate my own belief systems in terms of what I can do, both physically and what I can endure emotionally. And a week down the line, I'm still reflecting on all of that growth. And it was one hell of an event, an absolutely brilliant event. Brilliantly delivered. It threw absolutely everything at me and the kitchen sink, and I'm just really, really pleased to be able to come back and reflect on it now.
Was it what you imagined it was going to be?
I didn't really have any preconceptions, Lee, in terms of what it was going to be. I knew I'd read up a little bit about the event. Obviously, I'd spoken to the race director in advance, more to get some confidence that physically I was in good enough shape to complete the event. The response from the race director when I spoke to him is that this is not necessarily a physical challenge. You know, he reassured me that I would be fit enough to do the event. I did Ironman in Barcelona, I think 40 days before I flew out to Namibia. So physically, I was already there. But it was really, really clear from that conversation with the race director that this was going to be 80% a mindset challenge. And that's really what it turned out to be. It was more around mindset. It was more around personal admin. Are you looking after yourself? Are you being disciplined in terms of your nutrition, your hydration, managing your effort, managing your emotions and being able to draw on strength to come through those tough times. So it was definitely more towards the mindset than the physical challenge for me as an individual. But it certainly threw some things at me that I wasn't necessarily expecting. The heat out there was quite scary at times. It got to sort of 43 to 45 degrees on days at the peak times, and to be covering any sort of distance with a fully sort of self-sufficient kit in those conditions it got quite scary at times. So that was a bit of that was a huge challenge, and I'd been obviously aware it was going to be hot, but to manage my effort in that heat was really challenging. I had done some heat chamber work in advance. I was lucky enough to have access to a performance centre here in Manchester in advance of going out to Namibia, so I could train in specific conditions before getting out to Namibia. However, it was a completely different type of heat and a different type of challenge. So that was something that I had to deal with. The self care was quite challenging as well. I was struggling with blisters from day one. And the rules of the event are that this is a self-sufficient event. So although there was medics available to you, you had to carry your own medical supplies and apply your own medical needs after each day. So I was managing my own blisters from the first day, and that kind of caught up with me towards the end of the race. And I was dealing with quite a lot of physical pain to be able to complete the event. And that was something that I was aware I was going to have to lean into some physical pain. But just the amount of time on my feet in pain was quite considerable. So I had to really, really dig deep as well in that regard. So I was expecting all of that, but I think the levels that I was expecting were definitely elevated when I was there on the ground, for sure.
It's interesting. I think motivation is a temporary resource in many ways. I'm fascinated that you place emphasis on discipline, organisation. I'm not trying to put words into your mouth. Those are the words that spring to mind as a consequence of what you've described as to being critical to your success. What do you think have been some of the key lessons? You mentioned you're reflecting a week on, still reflecting, I imagine. What are some of the key lessons or insights you think you've gained about yourself from pushing yourself to that extreme?
I think there's definitely an element of reframing psychologically, which really, really helped me, Lee. So, I mean, I was a marketeer for many, many years, so I know the power of a reframe psychologically, and the power of a reframe when it comes to managing physical pain was really, really important for me, specifically when it got to the end of the race. So I was going through. I mean, just for the purpose of the listeners, that the last day was a 92-kilometer stage, right? So it's a really big effort to finish off the race. And during that stage, I was managing infected blisters, which were quite painful to manage on my feet. But I found myself on occasions just torturing myself mentally. So I was losing twice effectively. I was losing because I had physical pain in my body and my feet, but then I was just focusing constantly on that pain. And it took real effort, cognitive effort, for me to try and reframe that pain to something that was a lot more useful. So I managed to do that. It took a lot of effort, but after maybe 2 or 3 hours of running on this pain, I managed to completely reframe what that meant for me as an individual in that moment in time. I started to welcome the pain, accept the pain for what it was, and accept it as being part of what I'd chosen to do. And by doing that, it really enabled me to reframe it psychologically to a point where the pain didn't disappear, but it became completely manageable. And I was able to manage it through the race, through the checkpoint, taking step after step after step. So that power of reframing, I was aware of it, and I was aware of the power of it, but to have to really dig deep and reframe pain in your mind like that was something that I really took out of it. So that was, I think, my number one learning. And I think that the second thing as well I want to touch on is just the labeling of emotions, right? So I'd say that 90% of the time during this event, I was experiencing what you might call, or sometimes label, a negative emotion. So it was either fear, anxiety, stress, lots of self-doubt. The reframing of those emotions as well was really, really powerful. So not framing them as good or bad, just framing them as for what they are, an emotion, And then instead of reacting to that emotion, trying to respond to it in a way which is more useful for you. So why am I feeling this stress? Why am I feeling fear? Why am I feeling anxious about tomorrow? And then being able to manage that accordingly was really, really powerful. And that strategy alone is an absolute game changer, I think, not just in terms of physical performance when you're in these harsh conditions, but in any walk of life, right? Whether it's in your business, in your career, in your personal relationships. I think just making sure that you don't label an emotion as good or bad. It just is what it is. And being able to respond to it as opposed to react to it. That was a real learning for me as well.
Were they, if you reflect back, were those new learnings about your own resilience or mindset, however you want to describe? Was there anything new revealed to you, if you like, as a consequence of what you've been through?
I think there were definitely reminders in a really sort of heightened environment. So, I've been lucky enough, Lee, to work with and alongside some great practitioners when it comes to personal performance, and work with people who really understand the neuroscience of how your mind works, and to be able to boil that down into something that's more simple for us to understand. So I knew that emotions can be a performance attribute, and I knew that emotions can also drag you down and be a performance hindrance if you allow them to be. So I went into the event knowing that managing my emotions was going to be something that I was going to have to lean into. However, I don't think I was quite ready for the fact that I was going to be spending 80, 90% of my time in that zone of having to manage my emotions. It was almost overbearing to the point where even when you'd finished the stage, there wasn't really any time to have any R&R and downtime, because you then got into personal admin, managing your blisters, managing your nutrition, making sure that you were hydrating properly, making sure that you were prepping your kit for the next day, which was quite stressful. So I would say a lot of the time I was in that zone of having to manage my emotions. So I think it was a reminder, probably in the most harshest environments, of how powerful that can be. And also a reminder of how you really need to be able to tap into your system 2 way of thinking to be able to manage that situation. So it has to be done purposefully. If you just allow yourself to run on autopilot in that situation, the likelihood is that you're not going to do the prep, you're not going to do the admin, you're probably going to go and lie down in your tent for too long and then wake up the next day ill-prepared, ill-hydrated, without the right fuel in you to perform. So I would say that it was a reminder of what I already knew, but in the most extreme, intense environment.
I reflected back on our conversation when we first met, and we touched on the subject of life being about time and choices. It really struck a chord with me. Is there or could you talk about a pivotal moment, if you like, when for you a key choice has significantly impacted your life path?
Well, if you think about it, like, time and choices, Lee, the way that I frame a choice is a decision, really, isn't it? And, the neuroscience tells us that as human beings, we make around 35,000 decisions every single day. So 35,000 choices every single day. And the majority of those choices or decisions are just running on autopilot. You're not necessarily aware of the decisions that you make. It could be what you choose in the fridge for breakfast. It could be what time you decide to roll out of bed. It could be whether you decide to interact with your wife or not in the morning or the evening time. So I think for me, when I talk about time and choices, it's about tapping into or making the unconscious conscious. So making sure that you're aware of these micro decisions that you're making every single day, and you're aware of the compound effect that they have on who you are as an individual. So I think there's an element of making big decisions and big choices where, of course, you're tapping into the rational part of your brain and you're using facts and you're using truth to try and guide yourself in terms of decision making. And of course, we're all struck on occasions with some of those really big decisions where you need to manage your kind of emotional brain and your rational brain to try and guide you down the right path. But for me, I think it's more around making sure that you're aware that actually you're making decisions and you're making choices every second of every day. And those small decisions and those small choices that you make compound to form your identity, your actions and your behaviors. and ultimately will guide you to your destiny. So I think there's an element of having to rewire your brain and make sure that you're aware and making those unconscious things conscious. So when I think about time and choices, it's definitely more around how you can tap into the unconscious and make sure that you're maximizing that. And then when it comes to sort of bigger decisions, it's then having the ability to tap into both your emotional brain and your rational brain to try and bring them together to make sure that you're trying to make the very best decision based on your value systems or your belief systems, and sometimes having the courage to make decisions that might not necessarily feel right, but deep down you know it's the right path for you to take.
That view on time and choices, how's that evolved over the years? I think especially now as you've launched, and we'll come on to this, but you've launched onto coaching. I'm going to pronounce that right.
Yeah.
But how's that view on time and choices evolved, do you think?
Well, I think that there's definitely, for me as an individual, I think there's an element of maturity that comes with experience. And when I think about how my decision making has evolved over time, I think when you're younger, definitely you tend to be driven more on emotion. That's certainly something that I've reflected on personally. Specifically in your 20s, I would say, as you're growing up and life looks completely different through the lens of a 20-year-old than it does through the lens of a 40-year-old. And sometimes you will be driven quite a lot on your emotional feelings, and you'll make decisions based on feeling and impression. I think the older that I've got anyway, and the more mature I've got, and the more aware that I've become of that, I'm able to almost shortcut the system now. So I'm aware of these heuristics that appear in every human being, these lazy shortcut decisions that we all make. It might be a resemblance heuristic, for example, where if something resembles something, you will jump to a conclusion. And I used to be guilty of that all the time. And those choices that I used to make would be based on feelings and impressions. And now the choices that I make are more made through taking a step back. Instead of reacting to my psychological heuristics, it's responding through the facts and the truths that I'm able to tap into and my lived experience to make a more informed decision. So I think from a personal standpoint, the choices that I now make are far more balanced, for sure, far less emotional, far less led from impressions and feelings, and more a balance between facts and truths, and using my feelings and impressions to guide me, but not necessarily to make impulse, rash decisions where it's not going to serve me. I've never made a really great decision based off a really strong emotion, put it that way. My decision making is a lot better the more mature I've got, and the more I'm able to tap into facts and truths to guide me in the right direction.
You make a really good point. I think one of the things that strikes me is that I'm sure there will be listeners who feel perhaps that they don't have control over their circumstances. How perhaps could they begin making those intentional choices to which you feel? How can you do that? How can you make those intentional choices or begin making intentional choices in your life?
Yeah, well, it's a really good point, Lee. And I think there's an element of being aware. I think self-awareness is a big part of that. So if you frame things as being, I am a victim of these circumstances, life is happening to me, I'm in a victim hub mentality, then it's very, very disempowering. So I think the first thing that people need to do, the first thing that your listeners need to do, and it's something that we all have to work at, is actually realize that circumstances that we find ourselves in are actually a result of our actions and our behaviors. We are not victims of circumstances. Circumstances are a direct result of our actions and our behaviors, which can be almost like shining up a mirror to some people, because sometimes it's hard to take. It's hard to actually accept that the position that I'm in now currently is as a direct result of who I am, how I've behaved, and the actions that I've taken. But equally, by accepting that, it's super empowering, because it also means that I can change my actions, I can change my behaviors, and as a result of that, I can effectively create a completely different reality for myself. So I think what I try and practice time and time again is just a complete reminder to myself that I can create my own destiny. My actions and my behaviors can be controlled by me, and therefore I can create my own circumstances. I am not a victim of my circumstances. So there's a big difference between having that victimhood mentality and that drama triangle to being the creator. And I think when you can flip your own mindset to become the creator, not the victim, you can create game-changing results, and it can be transformational in terms of how you can operate as an individual on a day-to-day basis. But in terms of your ability then to go and achieve your dreams and achieve your goals, it can be completely transformational.
Let's talk about your transition from corporate life to onto coaching, and leaving behind that very successful corporate career to pursue coaching. It's a bold move, and I'm fascinated to understand what inspired the transition and perhaps what's been therefore the most challenging part so far.
I think for me, Lee, I think that the transition that I've taken, I mean, I was 20 years in a corporate career. You know, I made it to executive leadership level in a really, really successful private equity owned business. I've worked for some of the best sports brands on the planet. So it was a really big decision for me to move away from that. But actually where it came from is through my own self-development. So I was investing in coaching myself. I wanted to become a qualified coach. It was never intended that would be a business venture of mine. But through that experience and through having access to some great coaching myself, and through seeing the impact that it had on me as an individual and the transformational impact it had on my mindset, I truly saw the impact that it can have on other people as well. So I started to coach other people as part of that journey. And the rewards that I was getting from that was far exceeding anything that I'd ever got in the world of climbing the corporate ladder. So being able to have a direct impact on people's lives and to change their belief systems, which effectively were changing their actions and their behaviors and setting them on a completely different path, was so rewarding for me as an individual. And that was really the trigger point for me to decide I've found a different calling here. You know, I'm done with the corporate career. I've learned a hell of a lot. My lived experience in that world can bring me a lot of value in terms of my coaching practice. But that's really where my time and energy is best spent now, is working with people who know that they have got more to give. They're going through a level of frustration or stagnation, or they feel as though they've got unfulfilled ambition and they just don't know how to unlock it. And that for me is the power of coaching. And that's what now gets me out of bed in the morning. It's so powerful, and I'm getting so much personal reward from it.
You mentioned that corporate career. If you work with incredible brands, Manchester United, Ineos, incredible brands. Ineos, Grenadiers. Did I say that right? Is Grenadiers, isn't it? I'm looking up. I'm thinking in my own mind. I'm questioning that. It is Grenadiers. But how do you think that corporate background you've enjoyed has shaped your vision for onto coaching?
Well, I think there's a really good question there. Sometimes I ask myself the same question, and when I think back in terms of my career in the corporate world, a lot of it has been spent in high performing environments. You know, whether it was Manchester United in a high performing commercial function, or at Team Sky, and then Ineos, the Ineos Grenadiers, in a really high performing sporting environment. I do wonder what led me down this path of coaching, and what learnings I can take from that prior experience forward. And a lot of it is, well, first and foremost, we touched on mindset, right? A big part of my journey has been learning how, at least at a basic level, how the neuroscience of the mind works, and it can be a performance attribute. And that was something that was really instilled within the team at Team Sky from the outset. So we worked really closely with a chap called Dr. Steve Peters, who wrote the Chimp Paradox. I don't know if you're familiar with that book.
Yes, I am, yeah.
And, the Chimp Paradox, or the Chimp methodology, if you like, was instilled in the whole team at Team Sky and Team Ineos, to the point where it became part of the daily vernacular. So if you were exercising your chimp brain, for example, you would overtly tell an individual or your team that this is my chimp talking. Just let me vent. Just let me exercise my chimp, and then we can get back on track. And the reframing in my mind anyway, in terms of emotions being a performance attribute, really started when I got exposed to that methodology at Team Sky and Team Ineos, and that's really helped drive me forward in terms of my interest in that side of things, and I can take that forward to my coaching practice as well. And the other thing, Lee, which is coming out really, really clearly, the more people that come onto coaching, is a lot of people are challenged currently with their careers. You know, a lot of the topics that I discuss with my clients will be around mindset, lifestyle. Ultimately, career often comes into it as well. And my lived experience through working in some of these high performance teams, from First Direct right at the beginning, through to Manchester United, through to Team Sky, and then Team Ineos, and most recently Travel Counsellors, who are really, really successful as well. I'm able to bridge the gap, if you like, between pure coaching and mentoring, so I can offer career advice in terms of mentoring guidance if needs be for my clients as well. So all that lived experience that I've got through building my career is serving me really, really well, both from a mindset standpoint in terms of how we can work with clients to unlock that level of performance through their mindset, but equally in terms of my corporate experience, and that some of the challenges that I've faced personally are often very similar to what my clients are bringing to the table as well.
I read you reframed mental health as mental fitness, which I just thought was a terrific analogy. But I'm interested to understand how you explain that, how you view mental fitness, and why, therefore, you think it's important.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, for me, mental fitness is probably instilled down into three areas. I think the first area is having a really empowering belief system. Okay, and somebody said this to me. An old mentor said this to me years ago, that if you believe you can, you're probably right. But if you believe you can't, you're probably right as well. And that's really stuck with me throughout my whole sort of adult life, really. So I think when we think about mental fitness, it's drilling down to the basics in terms of having a really, really strong, empowering belief system, which is serving you. I think that's the first element to it. I think the second element to it is having mastery over your own thoughts as well. So it's really difficult to control what comes into your mind and the thoughts that enter your head. But if you can start to deal with them in an empowering way, and feed the thoughts that are serving you, but actually deal with the negative thoughts as well in a proactive way, I think that's the second part of sort of mastering your mind. And then going back to what we said earlier, it's understanding the role of emotions and converting those three things into transformative vocabulary. So having really empowering beliefs, controlling your thoughts and controlling your emotions, transforming that into the use of language that you have as an individual, which then in turn converts into actions and behaviors and effectively your identity. So I think it all starts with the mind. I'm a big believer in having a strong, healthy body and lifestyle, but until you've got it right up there, I think people are going to struggle. So it's understanding your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions, and it has to be underpinned by really, really empowering beliefs. I work with a lot of clients who will come to me, and when we start to drill down to the things that are holding them back, it's their actions and behaviors that they want to change. But actually, to change actions and behaviors, you've got to really challenge your belief systems. And that's where the magic of coaching really, really happens. If you can start to question belief systems and challenge them, and redesign them, then the actions and the behaviors start to fall out of the back of that. And really, that's where the magic of coaching really happens from a transformational standpoint.
So we took that fitness analogy a step further, that concept of kind of the daily reps, getting your reps in, if you like, from a mental fitness perspective. What are the daily mental reps, if you like, that you recommend or perhaps practice yourself to stay resilient?
I think you've got to look at what's going into your mind first and foremost. So what actually are you consuming? So making sure that the information that you consume is serving you. And we're all guilty. I am guilty of this in terms of taking in too much social media. Okay, that's one example. But making sure that you're consuming helpful information which aligns with your values and your belief systems. I think that's the first thing that you can do on a daily basis. So be selective. I think writing stuff down as well. People talk about whether it's journaling or, I've started to write quite a lot now on LinkedIn in terms of my social media. But I think writing stuff down is a really good way of distilling your thoughts. It's a really good way of refining your beliefs as well, and ultimately making sense of the world. If you're able to write things down on a regular basis, it's a really, really cathartic way of making sure that you're making sense of everything that's going on in your mind. And also reading every day, making sure that you're reading information. It's not just on social media, but you're selective over what you're reading. You're reading varied content. I mean, I think I've probably got 3 or 4 different books on the go at the minute, and it might only be 10 minutes a day, but making sure that you're reading content which is serving you and educating you from varied sources as well. I think those are the things that I do anyway, from a personal standpoint, that enable me to maintain a level of mental fitness. Don't get me wrong, I still need that downtime, and I still do have some social media, or I'll sit down with my wife and we might enjoy a Netflix documentary together. But making sure that you're regulating what you're ingesting, I think that's really, really key in terms of mental fitness.
So for those that perhaps are looking to build a strong mental fitness routine, is it clumsy analogy maybe from my perspective, but it's similar to physical fitness. It's inputs and outputs. So you're very consciously aware of what you're consuming, in this case, rather than eating, but what you're reading, what you're putting into your mind as opposed to putting into your body, from a social media perspective, from those kind of, the doom scrolling, whatever it may be, but also what you're reading. And therefore, from an outputs perspective, what you're writing down. I think all of those things sounds like a great way to start on a strong mental fitness routine.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that.
In terms of your own sort of surpassing your own self-limitations, if you like, in both life and career, I think that we all suffer with those in varying degrees. You've made that journey from, you alluded to it, from First Direct to Manchester United, Team Sky. It's a remarkable journey. Were there moments where you felt limited or perhaps doubted yourself?
I think absolutely, Lee. I think we're all humans at the end of the day, right? And I think we're running off software which is sort of 2,000 years old, and it's no longer fit for purpose in the modern world. So your default position in any situation that is new to you is to feel the fear and to feed the fear, and as a result go into flight or fight, right? And it's natural for everybody to recognize that. I think for me, it was a case of making sure that I wasn't allowing that to run my life, and leaning into the fear. I know it's probably an overused term these days, but it's so true. And recognizing that actually the only limitations really that exist are the ones that you put on yourself. And again, having that realization is just so powerful. So for me, even, and people will try and hold you back as well, even those people that are closest to you. I remember when I left, I must have been mid to late 20s when I left First Direct and joined Manchester United. And at that time, I took advice from the people around me, or at least I sought advice from the people around me. And God bless his soul, I remember my dad telling me that it was a ridiculous idea for me to go and work for a football club. I mean, I had a really safe job in a bank. I had potentially a job for life, if you like. It just didn't excite me, and it didn't invigorate me. And I knew there was more to life than that for me as an individual anyway. So even back then, I think I was wired in a way to lean into some of those risks, lean into the unknown, follow, if you like, my gut feel at that stage of my life, and it paid off in the long run. Don't get me wrong; I've not made the right decisions at every single juncture in my life, but I've certainly got to a position now where I'm able to at least feel as though I'm taking a risk, lean into the unknown, lean into uncertainty, because ultimately that's where the magic happens. You think that comfort zones are brilliant things to return to every now and then. Everybody loves a comfort zone, or a zone of familiarity, as we might call it. But nothing exciting ever happens there. So, and they will destroy you in the long run. And that's something that I've really come to embrace. I think the older that I get, the more knowledge and experience that I've got. And that's really what's driven me forward in terms of also leaving a corporate world and safety and security to start onto coaching. It was all around just having the belief that this is the right thing to do, and the belief that nothing exciting is going to happen in that zone of familiarity for me. So let's go for it. Let's see what happens. If I believe that I can, I will, and let's transform the way that I think about things. So I've certainly, throughout all my life, Lee, every single juncture I've been at, it's not been easy. None of it has been easy. All these big decisions that I've made over my life, entering the ultra marathon in Namibia, I was scared shitless. I'm not going to lie. I've never done that before in my life. Never done anything like that before. I've done single day events. I've done big challenges. But for me, to be in that environment was completely alien for me, and that was probably another big learning for me. Is just, take your past experience for what it is, because quite often you'll downplay your own past experience, and you'll upweigh other people's past experience. Their experience is greater than mine. I'm not worthy. It's kind of a default position for us to be in. But actually, if you flip the script there, you can put yourself in a completely different mindset, and you can build the confidence and the conviction to make decisions that would otherwise be scary. And some people wouldn't necessarily make those decisions because they are too fearful or are too scared. But as a result, they don't get the growth, they don't get the rewards at the end of it. So none of this is easy at all, but it's just being aware of the fact that by, I guess, making some of these big calls, or going against the grain sometimes, or just being brave and being courageous, that is where you're going to grow, and that is where the magic happens. So don't be fearful of it.
I think it's that self-awareness to which you refer is a wonderful attribute, invaluable. It's clearly enabled you to succeed in all sorts of ways. But I also think it's really important that your honesty around, for example, being scared shitless to do the ultra marathon. I think it's really important for people to understand that, being human is all of these things. It's uncertainty, it's discomfort, it's fear. These are all common emotions that we all suffer from in varying degrees, absolutely accepting that. But they're all emotions that virtually everybody will suffer from in some way, shape or form at some point. And I think that makes it easier for people to relate to, to people who, in whatever measure we want to apply, have succeeded. I'm fascinated to understand, self-awareness is a great trait, but how perhaps you help others identify and break through their own limitations in both their life and their work. How do you do that?
It's a really, really good question, Lee. And I think first and foremost, I only ever work with people who are open to this. Okay, so and I've been in situations before in my career where I've been surrounded by individuals who I know have got things that are holding them back, but they're not ready. They're not able to admit it to themselves. And if you try and coach individuals who are in that headspace, then quite often you're going to lead into some conflict, and it's not going to work because they're simply not ready to take the action. They're not ready to look within, and they're not ready to pull the thumb at themselves. They're constantly pointing the finger at other people. If they're in a situation where I am a victim of my circumstances, then it's very difficult to coach somebody. I prefer to work with people who are just an open book. They're willing to be vulnerable. They're willing to be challenged. They're willing to have their belief systems completely shaken up. And the way that you can get transformational results with those people is by challenging, asking really empowering questions, and making someone believe that they've got the power within to make changes themselves. So a great coach won't necessarily give very specific advice in terms of what you should do. I think you should do A, B, or C, or I think you should do 1, 2, or 3. I think that's bridging the gap into mentoring. A great coach will ask empowering questions to enable a client to then find the answer within, so that they become motivated intrinsically instead of by somebody else. They're effectively in a challenge state in terms of a threat state. So they're challenged towards getting towards their own goal. It's their decision. I'm going to do this. It's for me. It's not something that's being oppressed upon them. So I think that's how you probably get the best out of somebody, Lee, when it comes to a coaching conversation, is work with people who are open, work with people who are willing to be vulnerable, but work with people who are accepting of the fact that they've got a gap that they want to bridge. And those individuals are the ones that can really get transformational results. If they're a closed book and they're not willing to be vulnerable and they're not accepting of taking personal responsibility for their circumstances, it then becomes very, very challenging.
I want to talk about your transition to an alcohol-free life. I think it's a fascinating journey. How has that impacted your personal development, your approach to coaching, do you think?
Well, listen, my alcohol-free journey started back in 2018, Lee. So I was what you might call a typical middle lane drinker. Okay, so I would binge drink at the weekends. I would potentially have a bottle of wine with my wife on a Thursday. It might then go into a Friday and a Saturday. And it started to really hold me back. So I was probably mid to late 30s at the time. And I remember coming back from Marbella. I think it was a stag do that I'd been on. And I'd been on, I think, 3 stag do's within the course of maybe 3 months. And I just had enough. I returned back from that stag do and I made the decision that alcohol was just holding me back. I was getting more tired, more anxious. I wasn't able to perform at the levels that I wanted to perform at in any sort of part of my life. My fitness, my nutrition, my career, my relationships, they weren't floundering, but I just wasn't able to give that extra 5-10%. So at that point, I decided to take a tactical break from alcohol. And that was the last time that I really drank alcohol. And it was a game changer for me, Lee. And I'm completely non-judgmental in terms of my approach to how I coach people around alcohol. But if it comes to the table as a topic of conversation, then again, it boils down to belief systems. So a lot of people hang on to these belief systems that they think and they believe that alcohol is serving them. It gives me confidence. I need it to socialize. I need it to connect with my best friends. I need it to watch football with. It's all an absolute load of bullshit. It's a belief system that people hold on to because it's been part of their life and it's been ingrained in culture since they were 16 years old. And they're not willing. And if they're willing to question it and they're willing to challenge it, that's when they can start to really reframe their relationship with alcohol. And that's something that I went through personally as well. So I realized quite quickly in my alcohol-free journey that these belief systems that I had around alcohol were not true. I didn't need it to build confidence. I didn't need it to socialize. I didn't need it to spend time with my friends. I didn't need it to connect with people. In fact, it was having the opposite effect to what I thought it was having. And as soon as that mindset changed and as soon as my belief changed around alcohol, it was a complete game changer for me. I didn't need to use willpower. I'm not missing out on anything by not drinking alcohol. It's just adding to everything in my life. Better sleep, more consistency with nutrition, clarity of thinking, better fitness, consistency. And as a result of that, all these gains were happening in other areas of my life as well. Building confidence became easier. I was having better results in my career as a result of it. I was able to engage in more relationships on a deeper level as a result of it as well. So listen, my coaching, Lee, is 360, but alcohol comes up quite a lot with a lot of my clients because a lot of people who are operating at a high level in life, they're often looking for those areas to unlock the next level of performance. And alcohol is holding a lot of people back when it comes to that. Listen, I'm not saying that I'm operating at the best level of performance for anybody, but I'm operating at my personal best. And people need to accept that if they have a relationship with alcohol, it's holding them back in some way. That's facts. It's not serving them in lots of ways. And if you start to challenge that and remove it from your life, then you're going to see benefits. So I could talk about my alcohol-free journey you can tell I'm probably passionate about this, but it's definitely something that has enabled me to find levels that I've previously been unable to access, for sure. And to any of your listeners out there who are curious, sober curious, I would implore you to lean into that curiosity. Try it. Take a 90-day break. If you want to frame it as something that's more like a bite-sized chunk, if you like, you don't have to commit to being alcohol-free forever. Take a tactical break and see how you feel. And I can guarantee you, as soon as you get to that point where your belief system has changed, then you'll never drink alcohol again.
Has the journey affected you in ways that perhaps you didn't expect?
I think it has. I mean, I took a break from alcohol having come off that day because I wanted time to recover. I wasn't able to operate at the level that I wanted to. And if I look at my journey since then, what I've achieved since 2018, since I removed it from my life, that was never on the agenda. You know, my career skyrocketed. I did my first Ironman event. I've done my first ultramarathon. I've now done my first multi-stage ultramarathon. I've started my own business. I've done an MBA. You know, would these things have happened if I was still drinking alcohol? I don't know, but I would argue probably not. You know, and that wasn't the reason why I took alcohol out of my life. The reason why I took it out of my life was simply because I knew it was holding me back. I didn't know what levels of performance I could get to, but to say that I've done things that were unexpected would be an understatement for sure.
On that subject of performance, I'm interested to understand what perhaps peak performance means to you.
I mean, that's a really good question as well, Lee. I think peak performance or high performance can be one of those nebulous terms, right? And I think it can be very confusing and off-putting, I think, for some people. And in some ways, excuse my French, but it can be a little bit wanky, I think, when people talk about high performance or peak performance. And, you know, I think the way that I break it down specifically with my clients is that it's not about perfection, okay? High performance or peak performance is not about perfection. It's about raising your own personal standards to a level that you are capable of with the resources that you have available, and then doing everything that you can within your ability to execute against that. So it's pretty simple. It could be for somebody, it could be just running a 5K, that's fine. It could be losing 3 kgs, that's fine. It could be doing 90 days without drinking alcohol. It could be applying for that job, or it could be operating in your new job and going to a boardroom and presenting with confidence. That could be personal peak performance for an individual. It doesn't have to be operating at the elite level of sport or being the best in the world at X, Y, or Z. It's personal to that individual. And when I've got clients who are at all different stages of their life, they're at all different stages of their career, and personal performance means something different to each and every single one of them. So for me, it's not about perfection. It's just about raising your own personal standards to a level that you're capable of with the resources that are available to you. That's how I would describe peak performance on a personal level.
So what perhaps habits or practices have been key for you in maintaining that level of performance over time?
Well, I think we touched on it. We touched on it earlier, and we've spoken about it throughout this conversation. But I think maintaining a level of mental fitness is really, really important, and making sure that you're aware of the neuroscience and what's going on in your brain, and you're using it as a performance attribute. I think that's foundational stuff when it comes to managing your own personal performance. I certainly feel like there's an element of making sure that you move in your body. Okay, so making sure that you are moving your body daily, and whether that's, it doesn't have to be running ultra marathons in the desert. It might be just committing to doing a minimum of 10,000 steps a day. And then it might be introducing on top of that a minimum of X number of workouts per week, and making sure that you're looking after your body, because by doing that as well, you're feeding your mental fitness in a cathartic way. I think nutrition is a big part of it as well. So making sure that you're eating well, and that you're surrounding yourself with the right people. I think that's really, really key to elevating your own performance. So make sure that you're surrounding yourself with propellers and not anchors in your life. Okay, so I think that's really, really crucial. And what I mean by that is that some people will try and anchor you and hold you back through their negative outlook on life, or through their own personal issues that they want to express and get across to somebody else. to make themselves feel better. Make sure you're surrounding yourself with positive people who are pushing you forward, not people that are holding you back. And the other element that I'd say wraps around that really, really nicely is accountability. And that's a really big part of any coaching practice, really, is to work with somebody who is going to hold you to account, to elevating your own standards, whatever they might be, but equally hold you account to taking action towards your goals. And that's a really crucial part to coaching as well, to hold clients to account, so they're able to act with confidence, but equally know that there's somebody who's there to support them, but they also need to deliver because they've made a promise to as well.
If you could give just one piece of advice to someone aiming to take their personal or perhaps their professional life to the next level, what might that be?
Well, I think there's so much, Lee, in this conversation, but I think there's an element of if I was to boil down kind of self-development or coaching into some really specific things, I think self-development comes down to some pretty fundamental basics. I think it's remembering that thoughts are not true. They're just thoughts. Remembering that feelings don't require action doesn't mean to say that they always do or they always don't. It's just remember that they don't require action. Just feel feelings and then decide to respond if accordingly. Things are not good or bad. They just are. So if you start to label things as good or bad, whether it's emotions or something else, you end up on this roller coaster of life. So just deal with it. It's not good or bad. It just is. And then the other thing that we spoke about earlier is just remembering that you're not a victim of circumstances. Circumstances are a result of your actions and behaviors. And I think self-development really, everything kind of falls into one of those buckets for me. And it can be dressed up in different ways, and you can use different language to describe it. But if you can, most of my coaching conversations will kind of end up in one of those buckets. And 90% of it, as you can guess, it comes to how you deal with situations in your mindset.
One question I always like to ask of a guest is perhaps looking back, what advice you would give your 21-year-old self or 18-year-old self, 21-year-old, you pick the age, but your younger self, what advice would you give yourself if you go back in time and do that? What would you say?
Wow. If I look back at what I was doing when I was 21, I was investing a lot in my life experience at that time. So I was partying a lot. I was going out a lot and I was enjoying life. I probably did that for maybe 2 or 3 years too longer than what I should have done. So I think my advice to anyone who's kind of getting into self-development at an early age is enjoy yourself, definitely, but don't overdo it. There's no need for you to waste both your 20s and your 30s leaning into sort of the party side of life and enjoying yourself in too many ways. Dial into some other areas earlier on. I think that would be the advice that I'd give myself, because I do believe that there's some years went by whereby I probably wasn't elevating myself to my own levels of capabilities. However, I do say that with no regrets, Lee.
Good man. So let's look at your vision for Onto Coaching. What is that vision? What's the vision that you have for the business, and what therefore kind of impact do you hope to create?
So the vision that I've got is to change thousands of people's lives. I'm probably a month into the business now. Clients are coming on board, a lot of interest, and I'm already seeing a huge amount of impact. I just want to scale that as much as I possibly can. So I want to onboard as many clients as I possibly can. I want to grow the business now so it becomes beyond just Dave Callan Onto Coaching. Build it into a coaching platform which can help thousands of people. That's my vision and my goal with Onto. And I go back to what I said earlier. I believe that I will be doing that in the next few years. We've got off to a fantastic start, but ultimately I want to change thousands of people's lives. That's the message that I want to get out there with Onto. I want to help people who know that they've got untapped levels of performance, help them realize that, help them bridge that gap and leave that life of quiet desperation behind and go for it, and empower people to deliver against their ambitions. So yeah, I want to change people's lives, Lee. That's my vision, to keep it simple.
And so for listeners who perhaps are on their own journeys of change or reinvention, what's the one thing you hope they would take away from your story?
I think the one thing to take away that is that, emotions and mindset are a performance attribute. That's kind of the line really, which I go back to time and time again, both personally and with clients. Your mindset and your emotions are a performance attribute. And if you treat them like that, then you're going to be able to reframe your thinking in lots of different situations where if you don't think like that, it can pull you down in the opposite direction. So I think that's the key thing for me personally and with my clients, is to reframe your mind and your emotions as a performance attribute. And if you can nail that one thing, it's not easy, because a lot of those emotions that come in can take over and they can control you in ways that are not going to serve you if you let them. But if you can nail it and lean into it, I think that's a real game changer.
Fantastic. And Dave, where can we send listeners to find out more?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn's kind of the platform I'm using to get my message out there. My website is onto-coaching.com, where you can find information about my offering and my service. Or if you just search Dave Callan on LinkedIn, you'll find me there quite easily as well.
And that's Callan, isn't it?
It is Callan.
Fantastic. Dave, thank you. That's a wonderful insight that you've given us onto a subject that selfishly and somewhat self-indulgently I'm fascinated by, and have thoroughly enjoyed your insight today. The key takeaway from me, I recognise so much of what you described, but I think I was really reflective when you were talking about the role of emotions. And I think from my own learning, if I'm brutally honest, there's been many a time where I've allowed those emotions to inform my actions without stepping back and just taking your breath. So, really insightful from my own perspective here today. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you, and indeed for you to share some of your ideas and thoughts, which I think are truly impactful, truly empowering, and many people are going to benefit from. I've no doubt you will change, more than realise, your ambition to change thousands of people's lives. So thank you for coming on Extrology. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and I look forward to continuing to watch you thrive.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for having me.
Hey listeners, thank you for your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, don't forget to leave us a review. It's a great way to help others discover this wonderful community of extraordinary people just like you. You can also find more great content at extrology.com, and of course you can keep up to date with all things Extrology on the socials. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast. We look forward to welcoming you back next time. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.